Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I am actually making this deconstruction during a wedding day. I am shooting a wedding right now. There just happens to be a 6 hour gap of time between the morning ceremony that I just photographed and the evening reception that they're doing. So this is another crazy whirlwind weekend. I hope everybody is slowly able to get back to work wherever you are in the country or in the world. It really snuck up on me though. I had basically all of May, all of June, every weekend shooting one wedding, if not more, doubles and triples. It's been crazy. And I just knocked out 25,000 images, culled down to about 3,500 images that I fully edited and delivered to my clients just a couple days ago. And I will say, the more that I use Aftershoot, that app that I reviewed a couple posts ago, the more I'm convinced that Aftershoot is a complete necessity, totally critical to my workflow now. I am loving it more and more. So just a little bit of follow up there from a previous post. Aftershoot is working amazingly well for me. I know some people have had mixed results, but I promise you it's worth sticking with. Anyway, I want to deconstruct these three photos. I'm going to dive in right away. So this image, and this image, or at least give you the mechanics and the operational idea of what's going on. It's not that complicated. It's, motion blur due to the movement of my camera, but I'm not using any flash for these. And there's really kind of two, maybe three key aspects of this that you're going to want to dial in to get this look in the way that I've presented it. And there's a lot of different options and creative directions you could take this, but I'm kind of slowly working my way. I really like this look. And so the first thing to break down is when you see these back to back, you might even pick up on it. I am using direct sunlight from the kind of evening sunsetting light directly on my couple. So they're standing looking in the direction of the sun. And when I give them that direction and I kind of set them up, I go out of my way to make sure I say, okay, you guys can actually look down, but turn into the direction of the sun. And I'm kind of deliberate with that order and phrasing, because if I say, can you guys just look at the sun? Like, they're going to get really squinty and probably get some tears rolling down their eyes if they have really light sensitive, like blue eyes or something. Really, I say you can actually just close your eyes or look down in the direction of the sun. I don't want you looking right at it. But anytime later in the day, that last maybe 2 hours of the day, should give you a pretty nice side direct light on your subject. And I place them in a scene with the background behind them in really deep shadows. So we're at an angle relative to the sun that they are being directly lit from the side. They're looking in the direction of the sunlight, and the background behind them is just dark shade. So I do have a video I'll play that kind of breaks this down. I took some samples and talked through this whole thing with Nessa, but I do want to point out that this is a key and important aspect, is having the background much darker than them. Actually, this photo is an example of the background was sort of actually lit with the sunlight, but it was a black painted garage, so it still wasn't that important. The key is having a dark background so that the blur that you get from the movement of the camera shows the person, shows the blur like this. Yeah, this it's kind of hard to zoom in, but if this background was lighter in color, this cool blur moving effect wouldn't be nearly as impactful and as apparent. So that's really key. In fact, you can kind of see with this one, it didn't really come across as cool and exactly how I wanted. This is really what I'm going for, these two. And so place your couple in direct sunlight, dark shaded background. And then the next key thing, way more important than even that, I will show you in a second. Image stabilization on your camera needs to be on. So a key aspect of this is with the R6, I actually have sensor stabilization. Most mirrorless cameras now do have sensor stabilization. So I go into my menu settings, turn on all my stabilization to be the absolute maximum. Just notice by hand holding other shots completely unrelated to this, I could get about almost a full second hand holding with a 50mm lens. This lens does not have image stabilization, so it's just from the sensor. I could get about a second long exposure without any motion blur from my natural hand movement, which is fantastic. So image stabilization on, and then optionally, you can add an ND filter. The video I'll play in a second will show you what the ND filter does. This would allow you to retain a shallow depth of field from your background, because if you open up your shutter to about a second and your couple's in direct sunlight, uh, no matter what your settings are, you're going to be overexposed. Even if you're at base ISO, the lowest ISO you can get, and you have your aperture any wider than like f10 or something, you're going to be overexposed. So the neutral density filter allows you to shoot at like f1.2 or 1.4, something really shallow and wide open, without overexposing. It's really cool. This is a variable neutral density filter. I use the company Tiffen or Tiffen. I don't know how you pronounce it. 77 millimeter neutral density filter. It's really great. But the key aspect is about a half second, maybe a 1 second long exposure with image stabilization on. You hold as steady as you can. Tell your couple or your client, your subject, whoever, hold still, take the picture, hold it for just a brief hesitation so that they are crystallizing and freezing in the shot, and then you can move your camera. Just a quick little direction, kind of like this. So the video I'm going to play, we'll walk you through that right now, and I'll show you some images that I'm taking of Nessa as that's occurring. And yeah, we'll just kind of pause our way through this together. So let me pull up Lightroom. Boop. I'm going to start here. Okay, so the difference with this shot is that I've got this variable neutral density filter, which should allow me to shoot at a wide open aperture whilst having a very slow shutter speed. Just as a side note, I'm making this recording, and these images of Nessa are with the 50 millimeter f1.2. Probably something like 1/4 of a second shutter speed. So obviously, even at my lowest ISO, if I'm at 1.2, that's going to overexpose her skin tone like crazy. I'll take a picture of that just to be sure. Now, the key with this technique is to... So here's the images that I just took of Nessa. So again, because I'm shooting at 1.2 aperture, even at the lowest settings at about what was I at? 1/4 of a second, like she's way overexposed. That's a problem. So that's no good. I'm going to use the ND filter on top to darken the scene, keep the exact same camera settings, but now the scene is darker. So you can see between these two images, like I said, exact same camera settings, but she's darker because of the ND filter, darkening everything coming into my lens. One is having image stabilization on.
There's a bug.
Oh, there's a bug. And 2 is having your subject in really bright light, but a really dark background behind them, so there's a ton of contrast there. So I'm gonna get my slow shutter speed dialed in, and then adjust the ND filter. You can't see this live, but just as I turn it, it gets darker or brighter without changing any of my actual camera settings, because it's a neutral density filter. That's the nature of what this filter is meant to do. So I'm going to darken it until her skin tone is perfect, and then take a few of these techniques. They look really good. So I'll share these files with the video as it's playing. Okay, so I will just pan through a couple here manually in Lightroom, and some of them turn out, some of them don't. Some of them I didn't move fast enough. Some of them I did perfectly, and I'm really happy with. The key is, again, waiting just long enough so that your subject is frozen in time, and the image stabilization is doing a lot to help with that, and then moving fast enough that you get a streak in a way that is cool in whatever way you want. And I will note here that the neutral density filter is not required. You can totally shoot at like f18 or whatever the smallest aperture is, and do this. I did on, I don't know which one, but I definitely did that without the neutral density filter, and it's totally fine. But I like retaining the really beautiful shallow depth of field in the background behind the subject, pretty much always in all of my work. Resuming. Let the image stabilization work for the first hesitation, just the very first part of the photo, so that you get a nice, still, crisp subject. Then you sweep across for the rest of the frame. I'm going to go a little longer. Let's try almost a half second. That looks cool. And depending on your focal length and your lens, you may not have to go that fast. You can just hold it and slowly turn for some of these. It just really depends on how much streak you want and all the variables in your specific situation. Now, a lot of people do this with off-camera flash, where you can drag the shutter One of the reasons that works really easily with off-camera flash is because it's so bright. It's such a bright light source when you have it right up next to your subject. And without the flash, you really need the situational circumstance that your subject is in really bright sunlight with a dark shadow behind them. If she was in, can we back up just to show Nessa right here? If she was in that same bright sunlight, but against sunlit background, it probably wouldn't work as well. So I'm gonna do a quick test here. Down. There we go. Yeah, it still kind of works, but you don't get that beautiful contrast and the real impact of the... Yep, and here's an example of that. So you really want that dark background. I think there's a little bit left in the video. So if you pan to the left, it will streak and blur to the right behind the person, and the opposite is true. If you pan to the right, it will streak and blur in front of the person. Let's see if I can show the images. There we go. So pan to the left, it will blur and streak to the right, and if you pan to the right, it will blur and streak to the left, sort of in front of the person. Kind of cool. I really like that one. And then I have one other video I'll quickly show that shows the ND filter. In case you've never used one, every photographer should probably have one, but let me just show you what that looks like. Just to show you what the neutral density filter is doing, it's just a regular filter on the front of the camera, but the outer ring itself turns, and it allows you to, without adjusting any camera settings, basically like a sunglasses effect, to darken it. I think this goes like 8 stops. So what that allows you to do is have a very slow shutter speed and a shallow aperture. I'm at 1.2 right now, but I'm not totally overexposed in the scene. In fact, I can still darken it out entirely because it's such a dark neutral density filter. I'll link to it in the video. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. I tried to cover every aspect of this that I could think to. About a 1/4 second shutter speed seems to be the sweet spot. It's going to depend on the focal length that you're using. I think every single time I've tried this, I've used the 50mm lens. I would assume maybe about the same with the 35, but anything outside of that, I'm really not sure. But it wouldn't matter anyway, because it's totally going to depend on your specific circumstance and the scene that you're shooting. Just make sure you have your couple in direct sunlight, you have a really dark shaded background, and you have image stabilization turned on to its maximum capabilities on either from your lens or your sensor if you have that option in your camera. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions at all in the comments. I'd love to dive in and also share any examples that you get, and I will do the same as I continue to do this. So thanks everyone. Hope you have a busy weekend, and I'll be back soon. Bye.